Hi there. As a part of AgilePoint's version 10 release, we're proud to announce support for Memgraph. Now, if you're hearing that name for the first time, Memgraph is a high-performance, in-memory graph database designed for real-time analytics, streaming data, and graph-based AI applications. So at its core, what Memgraph does is it stores data as nodes and relationships, in other words, a graph, rather than rows and tables like a traditional relational database. So with that being said, over the course of this video, we'll show you how to create an access token, whether that's at the app level or the global level, and highlight how the various Memgraph activities are used in a sample application. So let's get started by creating our access token. Now what I'd like to do here is create a global access token so that this connection can be reused across a number of different applications. If you'd rather create a connection just for a specific app, feel free to create an app level token. So under App Builder, we have global access tokens. I already have one configured, so I'm just going to bring up Memgraph here in edit mode. Now what you're seeing here are all details that I can grab from the Memgraph login page. You're seeing the host and port, database name, and username and password. Now in my case, I'm going to go ahead and cancel this out, but if you're creating this token for the first time, please first test the connection and then save it. Okay, so now that we're connected into Memgraph, before we start running the application, I've logged into Memgraph itself, and there's a query that I'd like to run. As you can see here, match n, return n. So as you can see on screen, I have 4 person nodes in my sample data. And what I'd like to do here is just change what's displayed to the name. So in doing that, you can see here that I now have 3 users with the name of John and 1 user with the name Alice Blue. Okay, so let's take a look at our sample application. So as you're seeing here, I have the Memgraph activity group open, and there are 5 activities. So over the course of this sample application, you'll see each one of those activities demonstrated. But we have create node, delete nodes, execute query, query nodes, and update nodes. Turning our attention to the application itself, our first step is a human task where we'll capture some data. We're going to use that data to create a node. So let's go ahead and open up the activity configuration. So to get started with this activity, I have first connected into Memgraph. And as you're seeing here, I have a number of variables, all of which are coming from my form. So as you can see here, the label name is a variable, as are the name 1, name 2, name 3, and their associated values. Now for the property type, I could have selected from the dropdown here, but as you're seeing, similarly, this is also a variable. And what comes back here is also a variable that I'm going to store locally. In our next human task, I'm going to ask for updated names for the 3 users that were just created. So this will flow into our next activity, where we're going to query those users' details and update the properties. So to configure this activity, I've again selected my access token, and since I know I'm working with a person, I've left that selected here for our label. Now under the properties that I'd like to update, again, this is a drop-down list, and as you're seeing here, there are different properties that I can update. So I'm going to update the name and department, again, both of which are coming from my form. Now I know the data type ahead of time, so I've selected string here. And the action similarly is a variable, though again, I can select from the drop-down as well. Now as far as the names that I will be updating, as you're seeing here, I've written a query. So my condition is node.name and then whatever's coming here from the front end. Now as you're seeing here, our next human task will be to provide a condition to query a node. And that condition will be executed using the query nodes activity. So I've again connected to Memgraph and specified the node that we're working with as specified here in my query, where node.name is equal to the values coming back from my form. Now as the next step, I can specify my sort and pagination details, including order by, distinct, sort by, row limit, number of records to skip, and so on. And then finally here, from a response perspective, I provided a sample structure. Now in this case here, I could have stored this in a variable, but I'd like to use the schema mapper. So as you're seeing here, this is a repeating node which can return multiple values, so I've mapped it here to the details within my subform. Okay, so the results of that query will be shown on my next human task. Now as a next step, because Memgraph is a graph database, we can execute queries coming from the front end, which the user has provided, or perhaps from the back end as part of the process logic. So what I'm going to do next is ask the user to enter the details of a query, and we'll execute that as is. Okay, so let's open up the details of the execute query activity. So again, I'm connecting into Memgraph. And the query will be as provided from our form. Now from a response perspective, as you're seeing here, I have again provided a sample structure, though I could map this to a variable. But in this case here, I do want to use the schema mapper. And again, as you're seeing here, I've mapped these details to my subform. As an example, for this query, I was not interested in the department, but I have mapped the employee ID and their name. The results of that query will be displayed on our next human task. And as a final step, we're going to delete the node that we've created. Okay, so looking at our final activity configuration, we've connected to Memgraph, the label will be a person, and the condition here is where the node.name is equal to the value coming back from our form. And then lastly, at the bottom, you're seeing a disclaimer: if no conditions are entered, all nodes with the specified label will be removed. So now that we understand our application in design mode, let's go ahead and run it. Okay, so let's move into the application. And for this, I'm also going to want to have my Memgraph window open. So for creating a node, I have an autofill button where the label name will be a person. For the name, we'll have the value of Smith, data type of string. The department will be sales. The employee ID will be 12. So kicking this off, a process will now initiate behind the scenes, and let's go ahead and track it. Okay, so our process is kicked off. Our first activity to create a new node has been executed. So if I go back into Memgraph and run the same query again, we'll see a new node called Smith. And as you're seeing here, all of the values are as populated from our form. Okay, so moving back into our process monitor, we'll go ahead and open up the next task. Okay, so moving over to our next tab called Update Node. The first row, using the upsert action, is going to add a first name to the node we've just created, and we'll remove the department value. Okay, so let's submit. So our update node activity has just taken place. So if I go back into Memgraph and rerun the same query, we can see here that Smith has been updated to John Smith and the department has been removed. Okay, so let's go back into the process monitor. So now we have an activity active called query nodes. Let's open that up. So I'd like to run a query where the person's name is equal to John Smith. So on our next form, we're going to see all of the results of that query. Okay, so what you're seeing here are the results of that query, the employee ID of 12 and name. And if you recall, I did not map the department earlier. So next we're going to execute the full query itself. I'm going to go ahead and autofill the data. So the query is we're going to match any person's name where their name contains John. And as we discussed earlier, we have multiple Johns in this environment. To show you that, let me go into Memgraph. So as you can see here, we have John Williams, John Smith, John David, and just John. So we're going to see the results of that query here in our next task. So scrolling through my subform, we're going to see those here. Okay, so moving to the next tab here, we're going to the node that we created initially for John Smith. Okay, so that activity has been executed. So going back into Memgraph and rerunning the query. And as you can see here, John Smith has just been removed. Okay, so with that, that's going to conclude the content for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this gives you a better understanding of how to use the various activities in the Memgraph activity group as a part of a sample application. Thanks so much, and talk to you soon.